Hey there, I'm Dr. Magda. I am going to talk to you today about raw food and raw feeding for pets. This is a fairly controversial topic in the vet world, maybe a little less recently. I feel like I've been hearing about it less, but I wanted to talk to you about it from a real take perspective. I've been a veterinarian now for 17 years. I would say, so my first year I worked at a conventional practice, but pretty much since then I've only worked at integrative, holistic clinics. So at least 40 to 50% of the animals that I've treated throughout my career have eaten raw food. So my perspective is going to be pretty unique. There are things that I love about raw food, and then there's other things where I don't always feel like they're appropriate, but it sort of gets clouded over by the whole discussion about microbes, bacteria, and that whole thing. So that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. So for anyone new here, I'm Dr. Magda. I'm an integrative vet. I practice in Los Angeles. So a little bit of background about raw food. Most people consider Dr. Ian Billinghurst to be the veterinarian who kind of came up with this idea. He's a vet from Australia, so now he's one of the big leaders in the raw feeding world. So he started recommending raw feeding to his patients back in the 80s. What he started seeing was that a lot of animals would improve. So like their ear infections, their skin infections, their teeth, all of these things got better when he took them off kibble and processed food and put them on raw food. In the 1990s, he wrote a book called Give Your Dog a Bone, and pretty much the momentum started from that. I was in vet school from 2005 to 2009, so it really wasn't a big topic of conversation during that time. I mean, maybe a little bit. I really heard about it when I graduated. And I was actually pet sitting for someone, and they showed me this like freezer full of raw food, and I was like a newly minted vet student who was feeding my dog Hill's science diet and all the things that we were recommended in vet school. And I was like, oh, wow. I actually tried it for my dog at the time and she wouldn't eat it, which is something I will talk about in my video. That does happen. So yeah, that was kind of my introduction to it. And then I worked at a vet clinic in San Francisco where almost everybody at the time was feeding raw food. So since then, it's really kind of gained this momentum. It's gotten a whole, there's like different factions in the raw feeding world. There's like the prey model and barf. And I'm pretty sure most people that are watching this video know what raw feeding is, but just in case you don't, it's basically some combination of feeding raw meat, organ meat. Some of them include vegetables and fruits. Some of the raw foods don't include vegetables and fruits. So again, there's like different schools of thought about it based on this idea that dogs are carnivores. They're very closely related to wolves. The whole dog carnivore wolf thing, that's going to be a different video because that's kind of its own topic, just to give you an idea of where it comes from. And over the years, and since raw food has become a little bit more popular, one of the main worries about raw food, which, makes sense, it is raw meat, is the high bacterial content and the fact that you're feeding this to animal, it's not sterilized. I've even heard of veterinarians who won't let raw food fed dogs into their clinics because they're worried about bacteria, which, I mean, if you think about it, it's kind of silly. Dogs roll in poop, they eat poop, so they're covered in bacteria. I don't think that they're the most sterile creatures out there, whether or not they eat raw foods. And again, it makes sense, right? You're dealing with raw meat that is gonna have a higher incidence of being contaminated. There were a couple studies done in the early 2000s that basically looked at this idea about salmonella and how dogs and how their bodies tolerate it. And so what they did in these studies is they fed dogs raw meat that was contaminated specifically with salmonella. And then they also had a control group that was given meat that was not contaminated. And pretty much in both of these studies that were done, none of the dogs got sick. None of them actually had any digestive issues. Some of them that were exposed to the salmonella had a little bit of salmonella in their stool. Some of them didn't, so some of them cleared it on their own. Technically, a healthy carnivore, which, spoiler alert, I do think dogs are carnivores, they have a much more acidic stomach than we do. And that's a little bit by design because they're meant to eat those foods. They also have a much shorter gut compared to the length of their torso, because when you eat raw meat, if it stays in your gut for too long, that's kind of when the bacteria overgrow. So humans and herbivores, we have these really long digestive tracts compared to our torso length, and our food goes through kind of slowly. Dogs, in theory, it's supposed to go through pretty fast. And that is an adaptation for carnivores to be able to eat raw meat. But I'll definitely talk about all those things much more in my carnivore YouTube video. Okay, so now let's look at raw food. Is it the miracle food that everyone says it is? Does it cause as much bacterial issues in dogs? Does it cause these massive digestive things? I think that conventional veterinarians who aren't used to raw food, I mean, it totally made sense to be worried about it, right? It's raw meat, it has a lot of bacteria. But what was surprising is that the vast majority of dogs did great with it. not only did they not get sick, but sometimes it was like the improvements on the raw food were almost immediate, right? So their skin issues completely went away. Their digestive issues went away. I don't know, in my, we'll call it 16 years of having patients that are raw fed, I probably on one hand could count the amount of pets that had a pretty negative reaction to the raw food and they weren't able to be on it. So it does happen. I'm not going to be like, oh, it never happens. But I was honestly surprised at how rarely it does happen. Most pets actually do really well with transition to raw food. So yeah, that surprised me that their body is much more adapted to eating those kinds of foods. So those are the good things. Now let's talk about the whole, what some people say, like, is it truly a miracle treatment? So for this, there's a lot of caveats and there's a lot of things to think about. One, not all raw foods are created equal. So there are certainly raw foods that are not very well balanced that I find. And by balanced, I mean, I don't think they have the right amount of omega-3s. Pets their coat gets really dry on them, so you don't see those like amazing coat benefits. I've definitely seen some pets gain a lot of weight on the raw food if it's not, it's this whole issue with grass-fed meat versus conventionally fed meat. Pets eating conventionally fed meat are just going to have a lot higher saturated fats, which they're more likely to raise their cholesterol and make them overweight. So I've kind of seen different ends of the spectrum. So again, not all raw foods are created equal. To really understand how raw foods work in the body and how they would benefit a pet, I like to turn to Chinese medicine. The thing I love about Chinese medicine is that it just gives me this like different lens from which to see the world and understand patterns and where things are going to fit or not fit. So raw food is very cooling, which is great, and it's also very drying. So if your pet has what's called a damp heat condition, so colitis, right? They have that like awful smelly diarrhea. That pet is probably going to do great on raw food. If your pet just runs hot, pants all the time, they get yeasty ears, they have yeasty skin, those pets do amazing on raw food, right? Because you're counteracting the damp and the heat with dry and cold, which is like the perfect thing to get them back into that balance. The problem is that in LA, we have this hot, dry climate. So even though the coldness of the raw food is good, I find it sometimes a little bit too drying for my LA pets. And how does that show up in real life? Sorry, I'm going to back up for 1 second. Why is it dry? I actually think that has less to do with raw food inherently and more just to do with the realities of modern life, which is that we're putting this raw meat into the freezer. The freezers dry things. So if a wolf or a dog eats like a dead carcass, there's going to be blood there. There's going to be moisture. There's going to be like fat that's been heated by the sun. So it's just this very like, in many ways, it has a lot of those fats and oils and all of that stuff in it. Whereas we've taken that meat, packaged it nicely, put it into a freezer. Now it's really dried out. A lot of that blood is gone. Although, so that's not true for all raw food. Some of them are a little bit less moist. So I do find that we get this kind of drying effect, especially in LA, that's amplified because we already have this dry climate. What's interesting, and it took me a while to figure this out, is that I see that pets with that dryness, it's going to dry out their stomach. It's actually going to give them indigestion. Chinese medicine found this connection between the stomach and the teeth. So I actually find that pets on raw food, sometimes, especially in LA, have worse teeth because it's like we've dried out their stomach and that connection there makes their teeth really bad. So, and if they're not chewing on bones. So that's just something I've noticed. But yeah, I've seen more indigestion with it. I've seen more dryness. And a lot of pets, and this is the main thing, is a lot of pets are spleen deficient. Spleen deficient is a very specific pattern where pets actually don't want to eat raw food. So their digestion's already a little bit weaker. Raw food takes a lot of energy to digest. So like I said in the early example that I gave it to my dog and she was spleen deficient. She was like, yeah, I don't want this. So I always trust the animal. If they don't want it, that means they're a little spleen deficient and it's probably not the best food for them. So those pets actually do better on cooked food. As people in pets age, our digestion gets a little weaker and we actually can benefit from a little bit of the cooking. It kind of brings back some of that moisture. You add a little bit of water. That's just something to think about. That's not so. The pets that I find that tend to do the best with raw food tend to be young. I've seen puppies do great on it. I've seen 1-year-olds, kind of that like strong life force, that damp heat dog that overheats, lives in a humid climate. Amazing. The raw food all the way for those dogs, the chronic yeasty ear infection dogs, those pets really benefit from raw food. Once they start getting into that like 8, 9, 10 years of age and maybe they start turning their nose up to it, those pets don't do as well on the raw food. The other pattern, I'm just going to mention it really quickly, is that some pets actually get this like voracious appetite on raw food. And that's again, that dryingness, like you're drying out their stomach. And when your stomach is dry, you kind of get that indigestion. I don't know if you've ever had that feeling where you ate something and then immediately afterwards or like an hour later, you're like, oh, I'm hungry again. Like it's like that gnawing feeling in your stomach. That's that dryness, right? It's just drying out the stomach and that's going to make them hungry all the time. It's not that it's nutritionally deficient. It's not that there's like something missing with it. Some of those pets will lose a lot of weight on the raw food, which will be a different video. So that's kind of been my experience, my thoughts with raw food. They do amazing on some pets. I haven't seen the bacterial issue be a real major concern for dogs or cats. I don't think some pets, it's the right pattern for them, but yeah, there you have it. Hopefully that was helpful, showed you a new perspective, and I'm going to talk about other types of food. We're going to talk about kibble, canned, freeze-dried, sort of my thoughts and experience on all those foods as well. So don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.